Good morning. It is Sunday, May 29th. Thank God it's Sunday. And this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have crazy. No free lunch, fossil fuels, and chapter 12 from the book Hondo. All that and more when I get back. Thank you. And now the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, biblical principles to defeat the devil for May 29th. Experience the blessing of shalom. He who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him see peace and pursue it. The wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, approachable, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Follow peace with all men. 1 Peter 3:10, James 3:17, Hebrews 12:14. Prayer declaration. Father, blessed, enjoying enviable happiness, spiritually prosperous with life, joy, and satisfaction in your favor and salvation, regardless of their outward conditions, are the makers and maintainers of peace, for they shall be called the sons of God. I will live in peace, I will walk in peace, and I will seek peace. Amen. And that was the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, biblical principles to defeat the devil for May 29th. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded and asks why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Bring back the admiration of intelligence, morality, and beauty. Bring back single-income households, integration, parenting, the primacy of existence, certainty of knowledge, and universal rights and wrongs. Bring back principled behavior, masculinity, and femininity. Bring back Adam 12, John F. Kennedy, the gold standard, pre-HMO medical care, and non-profit news. Bring back civil service, the term stupid question, arguments and fights, the cultural influence of the church and the Boy Scouts. Bring back the influence of social organizations such as the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. Bring back bowling. Thank you. Left-wing, right-wing vocabulary. The left says, going forward. The right says, from now on. The left says, homeless. The right says, squatter. The left says, migrant. The right says, fugitive. The left says, eliminate. The right says, reduce. Thank you. So there's a lot of issues going on with the Uvalde school shooting. One of the most salient features of this for the true conservative is cultural, that we have to take a good hard look at our culture. And we have in the left, the cult of insanity, where the left has gone to the point where it actually worships insanity, and everybody else kind of goes along with it. How many times do you hear the word crazy used with admiring tones of voice, where people say, wow, that's crazy? So if you have adults around you all the time that are worshiping insanity, is it a real stretch to believe that a child would decide that the best way for them to gain attention, approval, and affection would to act crazy? And what's crazier than getting a gun, going to a school, and shooting the place up? Thank you. Guess what? There's no free lunch. Quote, only if we understand why and how certain kinds of economic controls tend to paralyze the driving forces of a free society and which kinds of measures are particularly dangerous in this respect, can we hope that social experimentation will not lead us into situations none of us want, unquote. F.A. Hayek. While Hayek was clearly writing about a much broader policy apparatus than just the minimum wage law, we certainly see minimum wage setting a tremendous example of what he was warning against. A law that is clearly driven by social experimentation has delivered unintended yet foreseeable consequences that cannot be considered positives for the society at large. And that was, there's no free lunch. Thank you. So our correction from yesterday, the moral case for fossil fuels, we are at chapter 3, not chapter 2. So, and this is going to be the last part of chapter 3 in the book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels by Alex Epstein. I highly recommend it. This is the book that makes the case that it is the right that are the true environmentalists. It is the conservatives and the Republicans that are the true environmentalists. Know it, understand it, believe it. For most of human history, agricultural work was done by the muscle power of humans or draft animals, placing a low ceiling on the amount of farmland that could be harvested and requiring often 90% of populations to be devoted to farm labor. The oil industry changed that by making available cheap, concentrated energy that could power tractors, combines, and other forms of high-powered farm equipment. Matt Ridley, author of the valuable survey of human progress called The Rational Optimist, describes the value of mechanization on his own farm. A modern combine harvester driven by a single man can reap enough wheat in a single day to make 500,000 loaves. A single man made into an agricultural superman by the power of oil. Another example, oil-based transportation causes a dramatic increase in the amount of farm products that can be brought to market. For the vast majority of human history, the world was full of patches of useless potential farmland. Useless because the land was too far to ship from. When men and goods travel by horse or mule, let alone on foot, the shipping costs quickly exceed the value of the cargo. But the 20th century's gradual increase in oil-powered transportation, railroads, freighters, and trucks especially, brought an enormous amount of remote farmland, once too expensive to ship from, within reach of anyone in the city, state, country, and eventually the world. The cheaper transportation became, the more farmland came into the global agricultural economy, and the more plentiful and affordable food became. By the same token, the cheaper transportation became, the more new seeds and other supplies could be brought into new locations to make previously low-performing land yield a giant amount of crops. Much of the Green Revolution, led by Norman Borlaug, involved bringing in new, more resilient forms of wheat and rice to places like India. This was expedited and amplified by cheap global oil-powered transportation. Another example, gas-based fertilization increases the amount of crops that can be grown per unit of farmland. The amount of crops that can grow today is an utterly unnatural phenomenon. That is, it is way beyond the natural capacity of the nutrients in land to nourish crops in one season, let alone season after season. One solution to the problem of fertilizing was manure or some other organic fertilizer, which increased the amount of nitrogen plants could absorb, and thus the amount of them that could grow. The use of such fertilizer allowed population growth and living standards to rise throughout the 19th century, but there was a problem. As population grew, it was harder to find enough manure to collect. The supplies of guano off the coasts of South America and South Africa were being exhausted, which caused eminent chemist William Crookes to declare in 1898 that all civilizations stand in deadly peril of not having enough to eat. The solution was Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch's system of making large quantities of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer using enormous amounts of methane, the predominant component of natural gas. Another example, electricity-based or diesel-based irrigation increases the amount and reliability of water going to crops. Irrigated lands average more than 3 times the crop yields of rain-fed areas. Sometimes irrigation occurs via gravity, but when it doesn't, it takes a lot of energy, usually fossil fuel energy, to move the water. Finally, the achievements of Norman Borlaug and other great food scientists, often called the Green Revolution, were possible only because of the time created by fossil fuel civilization to engage in intensive research, because high-powered machines have made it unnecessary for all of us to do physical labor. Fossil fuel energy is the food of food. It is an undeniable truth that in providing the fuel that makes modern, industrialized, globalized, fertilized agriculture possible, the oil industry has sustained and improved billions and billions of lives. If we rate achievements by their contribution to human well-being, surely this must rank as one of the great achievements of our time, and when we consider the problems with that industry, shouldn't we take into account that it fed and feeds the world? And yet, have you ever, and I mean ever, heard of any major public or private figure give the oil industry credit for it? I see Bono and other celebrity activists get credit for caring, but not the oil and energy industries for doing. More fossil fuels, more ability. Without the energy industry, the agricultural industry would not exist. The world could not support a population of 7 billion or 3.6 billion and perhaps not even 1 billion. To starve our machines of energy would be to starve ourselves. What is true of agriculture is true of every industry. The energy industry has a special place in human productivity, prosperity, and progress. As the industry that powers every other industry, it can be considered the master industry. Whether we are talking about the computer industry, the electronics industry, the healthcare industry, or the pharmaceutical industry, every industry uses machines, uses resources that are manufactured using energy, and uses time that is available because of our high energy society's productivity. The less energy we have, the fewer machines an industry can use, the fewer resources an industry has, and the less time it has. And what happens to the industry happens to the rest of life. The less productive industry is, the less time, resources, and machinery we have to enjoy our lives. And I want to stress, enjoy our lives, because it's not something we typically think about when we think of energy, but we should, because more energy means more ability to enjoy our lives. If our standard of value is human life, the ultimate benefit that a commodity like fossil fuel energy can deliver is to contribute to the pursuit of happiness. If we can only survive in a way that is miserable, why survive? Happiness is the reward of life, and energy is a great enabler of happiness, including forms of happiness that we are taught to associate with people who decry large amounts of energy use. Take traveling to places that excite us. In my life, I've been fortunate enough to travel to many such places. I spent 15 days river rafting in the Grand Canyon, several hundred days snowboarding or skiing on faraway mountains, and gone to Italy, France, Israel, Turkey, and other faraway lands. I'm not setting any travel records here, but no doubt I've used a lot of cheap energy to enjoy what the world has to offer. On a more local level, I love living in Southern California and being able to get to a lot of places easily by car. I enjoy martial arts, especially Brazilian jiu-jitsu, as a hobby, and for years I would happily drive an hour after work almost every day to get to my favorite jiu-jitsu school. I was using a lot of cheap energy, and if it hadn't been cheap, I wouldn't have been able to afford it. More fossil fuel energy, more ability to pursue happiness. I keep stressing that more energy means more ability to take the actions necessary to flourish, because I want it to be in our minds at all times that when we talk about more or less energy, we are talking about more or less ability. And everything we want in life depends on ability. Thus, in every realm that affects our lives, we should expect to discover that more energy can play an amazingly positive role. That includes our environment, including our climate. So he's touching on the idea that I just talked about. We Republicans, we conservatives are the ones, the true environmentalists. Fossil fuel energy and our environment. The relationship between energy and environment is usually considered in a negative way. How can we use the energy that will least impact the environment? But we have to be careful. If we're on a human standard of value, we need to have an impact on our environment. Transforming our environment is how we survive. Every animal survives in a way that affects its environment. We just do it on a greater scale with far greater ability. We have to be clear. Is human life our standard of value, or is lack of impact our standard of value? If we're on a human standard, we should be concerned in a negative way only about impacts of energy use that harm our environment from a human perspective, such as dumping toxic waste in a nearby river or filling a city with smog. But we should also assume that energy gives us more ability to improve our environment to make it healthier and safer for human beings. I'll explore this in detail in chapters 4 through 7, but for now, I'll just observe that the natural environment is not naturally a healthy, safe place. That's why human beings historically had a life expectancy of 30. Absent human action, our natural environment threatens us with organisms eager to kill us and natural forces, including natural climate dangers, that can easily overwhelm us. It is only thanks to cheap, plentiful, reliable energy that we live in an environment where the water we drink and the food we eat will not make us sick, and where we can cope with the often hostile climate of Mother Nature. Energy is what we need to build sturdy homes, to purify water, to produce huge amounts of fresh food, to generate heat and air conditioning, to irrigate deserts, to dry malaria-infested swamps, to build hospitals and to manufacture pharmaceuticals, among many other things. Of those of us who enjoy exploring the rest of nature should never forget that energy is what enables us to explore to our heart's content, which pre-industrial people didn't have the time, wealth, energy, or technology to do. We'll revisit this topic later. For right now, I just want to stress that whatever we have more energy, we have more ability everywhere. including the places we can do damage. So when we look at the damage or the risks of damage, we have to take into account the positive as well. Once again, we're always looking for the big picture about what benefits human life. We have seen the big picture. We have seen that non-fossil fuel attempts at cheap, plentiful, reliable energy for billions of people fall short, because none of them involve a process wherein every element can be scaled cheaply and reliably. But fossil fuel technology puts everything together. It can get a plentiful fuel source cheaply and convert it to energy cheaply on a scale that can power life for billions of people. This is why when people choose to use energy to improve their lives, 87% of the time they choose fossil fuel energy. The technology is that far ahead of the competition. If we want cheap, plentiful, reliable energy around the globe, we absolutely need to use fossil fuel technology. If we want to flourish, we need fossil fuel technology. And yet, opponents of fossil fuel energy claim there are catastrophic consequences to using fossil fuels that will prevent us from flourishing. That will be our subject for the next several chapters. But before we get there, let's be clear. If fossil fuels have catastrophic consequences and it makes sense to use a lot less of them, that would be an epic tragedy, given the state of the alternatives right now. Being forced to rely on solar, wind, and biofuels would be a horror beyond anything you can imagine, as a civilization that runs on cheap, plentiful, reliable energy would see its machines dead, its productivity destroyed, its resources disappearing. Thus, it is disturbing to hear politicians talk about restricting fossil fuels as an exciting opportunity. John Kerry, our Secretary of State, whose job is to represent the mainstream views of America to the rest of the world, described the prospect of outlawing the vast majority of fossil fuels, even if there is no catastrophic climate change, this way. If the worst case scenario about climate change, or let's start, quote, if the worst case scenario about climate change, all the worst predictions, if they never materialize, what will be the harm that is done from having made the decision to respond to it? We would actually leave our air cleaner, we would leave our water cleaner, we would actually make our food supply more secure. Our populations would be healthier because of fewer particulates of pollution in the air, less cost to health care. Those are the things that would happen if we happened to be wrong and we responded, unquote. Actually, the type of response governments around the world have embraced, an 80% reduction in CO2 emissions over several decades, would, by all the evidence we have, lead to billions of premature deaths. Fossil fuel energy is, for the foreseeable future, necessary to life. The more of it we produce, the more people will have the ability to improve their lives. The less of it we produce, the more preventable suffering and death will exist. To not use fossil fuels, therefore, is beyond a risk. It is certain mortal peril for mankind. That brings us to the issue of the major risks cited with fossil fuel use: climate change and environmental degradation. As we begin to think about risks, we need to keep this in mind. The reason we care about risk is because it is a danger to human life. Thus, if something is essential to human life, like fossil fuels, we need to assess all risks in that context. We need a rigorous big-picture examination of fossil fuels' impact on climate and other environmental issues. We must clearly hold human life as our standard of value, or if we don't, we must make clear that we are willing to sacrifice human life for something we think is more important. With that standard, we must look at the big picture, the full context, and we must use experts as advisors, not authorities, getting precise explanations from them about what is known and what is not known, so that we as individuals can make the most informed decision. So that was the conclusion of Chapter 3 from the book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. Coming up next is Chapter 4, The Greenhouse Effect and the Fertilizer Effect. And that's going to prove to be fascinating, I'm sure. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now back to the book Hondo. It's going to be chapter 12. When we left things in chapter 11, Angelo and her son, they were making preparations to leave the ranch. Vittorio had come by with his several of his braves to show them off for her to pick a husband, because he's tired of waiting for little warrior, or small warriors, actually the nickname or the new Apache name for her son, to get a father. Vittorio is very anxious that there be an Apache in his life to teach him Apache ways, etc. So now Mrs. Lowe is not eager to marry an Apache. She would rather either stay married, I guess, to Ed Lowe, or preferably, I think she really wants to marry Hondo Lane. So anyway, so she has until the spring rains to make her decision. Or actually, he's given the spring rains because she told Vittorio, my husband will be back. Well, he said, you got until the spring rains for your husband to come back, and if he's not back by then, you're going to take an Apache husband. Boom, ultimatum, that's it. So she's making plans to try to escape and get to the fort. So that was chapter 11. Now we go to chapter 12. And chapter 12 is the climactic chapter, the chapter when everything comes to a head for Hondo Lane, Ed Lowe, and Ed Lowe's sidekick named Fallinger. When Fallinger and Ed Lowe had ridden back a quarter of a mile from Hondo's place of stopping, Lowe drew up. "Look," he said quietly, "we've got him. Right now he's making camp. He'll be mighty cautious, so we'll let him be. Come daylight, either before he's up or when he's getting up, we'll take him." The gambler shrugged. "Your party?" He studied the hills. "His fingers will be stiff then." Fallinger looked at Lowe with a faint shadowing of contempt. "Don't take many chances, do you?" "Why be a sucker?" From the position Lowe had chosen, their arroyo was in view. They could not see Hondo Lane, nor could he see them, but escape from his camp was impossible without alerting them. Fallinger was quiet. The farther he had gone, the less he liked any part of it. He was a man without qualms. Lowe knew little about him aside from his utter lack of scruples and the fact that he was a slick second dealer who knew cards and worked well with a partner. Fallinger had done murder in Missouri, drifted west into Kansas, then south into Texas. He was wanted in both places. Yet he had an admiration for a brave man, and Hondo Lane was such a man. Despite the fact that he worked with Lowe, he despised him. Yet not even Fallinger knew that Lowe had deserted a woman in Indian country. Had he known, he might have killed him out of hand. Fallinger was restless. Their camp was good. They needed no fire. They had food and whiskey. Nevertheless, the premonition he had felt earlier now returned. Hondo Lane was carrying several months' wages from the army and a small poke of gold on his own. It would make a rich haul, and gambling had not been profitable. Too many had lost to them, and the word had gone around. It was time to drift, and without money, drifting was impossible. Broodingly, he watched Lowe. What drove the man? What was there in him aside from greed and hatred? Yet no man was all bad. Fallinger, who was bad in most ways, knew that he himself was not all bad. Lying on his back, he looked up at the stars, thinking about Lowe. He decided that Lowe was weak and jealous. He would always, Fallinger decided, strike at whatever was stronger and better than himself. The only reason that Lowe had neither left him nor struck at him, the gambler was sure, was because he considered himself smarter or braver. The thought was galling. "It better be tomorrow," he said the word suddenly. "I'm going back." "It'll be tomorrow." Hondo Lane had made dry camp in the gully. It was also a camp without fire. He was drawing too near to his objective now to take any chances. Also, there had been occasional dust along his back trail, and once his eye had caught a flash of sunlight on some moving object behind him. He could be mistaken, of course, but somebody seemed to be trailing him. Somebody not an Indian. The bed he had chosen was in a small open space in the middle of a thicket of mountain mahogany and prickly pear. There's a little cat claw, too. In this place he could sleep without fear, for nothing human could approach his bed without making considerable noise. On the soft sand he hollowed a place for his hips and rolled in his blankets and ground sheet. He slept, as always, gun in hand. His saddle lay beside him, his rifle in the scabbard, and his horse was picketed a few feet away. Sam crept under the brush on his belly and put his dark muzzle down on his paws and looked at the man he loved. The man had strange ways, but he was Sam's friend, and they understood each other. And upon this night, Sam too was restless. Twice that day his nostrils had caught a vague smell, faintly familiar, but scarcely tangible. Sam was uneasy, no more. A quarter of a mile apart, three men looked at the night sky. One was discontented with his situation, but ready to accept the profits of murder. The second was thinking first of murder and second of profit. And the third, lying on the sand among the thorns and brush, thought of a cabin, of the firelight on a woman's face, and of her shadow on the wall as he tried to go to sleep. The moving shadow of a woman on a wall and the faint sounds of a woman working. It had been a long time, a long, lonely, restless time since he had heard such sounds. The lineback had found some grass. He pulled at it, then ate. The sound of his jaws moving was pleasantly relaxing. The man who thought of a woman went to sleep. Twice in the night the dog awakened and looked at the man, then listened with pricked ears. Had he heard something far off? He listened, and the night listened around him, and there was no sound, and the dark muzzle lowered to the paws against the sand, and the dog's eyes closed, and the horse, too, laid down. A coyote moved to the arroyo's edge and lifted his nose to the sky, but catching the scent of a dog and man, it moved warily away. 3 miles to the south and west, a mescalero walked up a trail, then suddenly stopped. His feet, sensitive through the moccasins, detected something wrong in the path. He knelt, his fingers exploring, and he found the indentation made by a horseshoe. He muttered something to the others who gathered around him, and the three stood talking in undertones and looking away to the north and east. Then they walked their horses into a hollow hand of hills and prepared to wait until morning. There was a white man ahead of them, and possibly more than one. There were scalps to be had, coups to be counted, and they would return to their village, men made stronger by the death of enemies. Their dark faces relaxed, and they did not talk, and then they, too, went to sleep. And the planet turned slowly in the vast night sky, and the stars looked down, and there was a smell of damp and coolness in the air. Far over the mountains, low clouds gathered. Perhaps the planting rain? Under a quiet sky, the planet turned, and horses ate, and men slept, and death waited for morning. A bright star hung like a distant lamp in the sky when Hondo opened his eyes. He did not lie still. To awaken was to rise, and he did so now, getting swiftly to his feet, buckling on his gun belt, holstering the gun, and drawing on his boots. Sam came to his feet with one swift, unnoticed motion as Hondo rolled his bed. The dog growled low, and Hondo looked at him and watching. The Indians were near, and their moving disturbed a rattler which coiled and sent out a short, sharp warning. Hondo relaxed, but Sam growled. "Cut it out, Sam. I can hear him." Yet in that instant, his perception sharpened by danger, he sensed something else. The dog was disturbed as he had not been seen him before, and the dog was not directing his attention toward the sound of the rattler. There was a frozen instant when Hondo's ears caught its sound, when, with the instincts of a wild thing, he dropped suddenly and rolled over the bank beneath its added protection, backed by the deeper portion of the brush-choked gully. As he moved, one swift grab slid the Winchester into his hands. And after that single violent animal-like dive for safety, all was still, unmoving, and the movement itself had been relatively soundless. Now Hondo lay still, listening, scarcely able to breathe. A bee buzzed near, landed on a bush. Hondo could see the texture of the wings, the flexing of the tiny muscles of the body. Sam was quiet. The lineback, seemingly aware of the sudden tension, was still. Not a sound disturbed the clear, bell-like beauty of the morning. There was nothing. And then there was. 2 riders showed up suddenly on the canyon rim, rifles ready, starkly outlined against the morning. Lowe and Fallinger had ridden their horses forward through the soft sand. At first they considered crawling to the rim, but Lowe was aware of the dog's danger, and had no desire to come upon the big mongrel suddenly. It would be a simple matter to ride right up to the rim, keeping a spacing of about 20 yards, then fire. Hondo Lane would be offered 2 shots, which was sure to make him hesitate an instant if he saw them at all, and they would cut him down. The plan was perfect up to a point. They had not counted on the alertness of Hondo Lane or the hearing of Sam, nor did they know about the Apaches. Fallinger liked no part of it. His heart was pounding and his mouth was dry. He had no breakfast, and he desperately wanted coffee. They had killed their whiskey during the long night, and his nerves were jumpy. It was too quiet. Moreover, he was moved by the beauty of the morning. Something deep within him seemed urging him to stop, to breathe, to enjoy. This was something one could not buy in bottles. It was bright, clear, all too beautiful. Fallinger had killed. He had shot men in the back, and he would not hesitate to do so in the camp again. Yet he loved life and loved it dearly, and in that awful moment of realization, he saw in the clear, sharp beauty of the morning what wasted years he had left behind. He looked over at Lowe, started to speak, and he hesitated. Lowe was alert, tense. His rifle was ready. Lowe was a killer, as are many cowardly things, and he could not accept that there should live things and persons superior to him. Angie's father had always been a better man, but wanting the ranch, Ed Lowe had played a game, fooling the father more successfully than he could ever fool the daughter. Their horses walked in the soft earth. They moved forward step by step. Before them, their view of the arroyo widened. The morning grew brighter. The sun lay against the far bank and at their backs, for they had circled for this advantage so that Hondo would have to fire into the glare of the sun. Fallinger heard a bird call. He heard the soft fall of his horse's hooves. A leaf brushed his face, and off across the far hills there were low clouds. The very canyons, moraines, and hanging valleys that showed sharply clear in the bright air. He liked the feel of the horse moving under him, liked the smell of it. He liked the smell of sage and of crushed cedar. Why had he waited so long to realize this? Lowe caught his eye with a signal. Fallinger's rifle came up. It was live or die now. They breasted the slope. They saw the rolled blankets, the open space in the brush, the line-backed horse, and nothing else. In that single awful moment of awareness, both men were caught, suspended in the moment. Both had expected a target, were ready for it, and there was nothing. Then from Fallinger's far right, a flash of sunlight on a rifle barrel turned his head. For one swift, stark moment, he saw the Apache, saw the dark, slim body, saw the rifle muzzle not 40 yards away, and knew he looked upon death. He lifted his rifle and heard soft, gasping words torn from him. "Oh, God." And then the rifle bullet smashed into his jaw, tearing through his throat, and he fell. His horse sprang from under him. Vaguely he heard other shots, but they were not for him, nor was he for them. He lay flat on his face with the taste of blood and earth in his mouth, and he was choking, and he was seeing again the bright morning he had left, and with the last muscular effort, he rolled over to look at the sky. There was a white cloud there, so small, so lonely, so white against the vast blue dome of the morning. For day had come. It was here, and Fallinger looked up at the sky and saw the cloud fade and knew he was gone. And he tried to speak past the blood, and there were no words. There was nothing anymore. One moment there had been nothing, and then the two riders appeared on the skyline. Their wide separation rang a bell of warning in Hondo's brain, but at the same time, he knew that while it was this that had disturbed Sam, it was not this that had disturbed the rattler. And the crash of shots told him he was right. He saw the near man drop, saw him hit the ground, heard a thin, despairing cry. Then he saw the other man drop also. The Apaches had been following Hondo Lane. They had not expected 2 men. They had no reason to believe there could be 3. To count coup upon the body of a dead enemy is not so great a glory as to do it upon a living one. All 3 Apaches sprang suddenly forward into death. The nearest Apache was a tall, splendidly built man, and he sprang eagerly, rifle held high. Hondo Lane's bullet took him under the breastbone, striking at an angle, and ripped out of his side below the heart. The splendid leap was the last movement, for when the Apache touched the ground, all that amazing wiry strength was dead. A blasted, wasted thing giving blood to the sand. Hondo fired swiftly, saw the second man go down, the third vanish. For an instant, Hondo lay still. The second white man to be shot by the Apaches had fallen from his horse into the arroyo. Worming his way through the brush, Hondo made it to his side. It was Ed Lowe. Even as he reached his side and laid down his rifle, the remaining warrior leapt from the brush into the saddle of Fallinger's horse and was gone from sight. Hondo checked Lowe, then sat back on his heels. "You're not hurt too bad." Lowe, badly shaken, sat up. Some color was returning to his face. There was blood on his shirt. He drew a picture from his shirt pocket. "This tintype saved me." The bullet had struck his chest at a flat angle, and hitting the tintype had glanced away, tearing the skin beyond it with a burn rather than a wound. Hondo Lane got to his feet, picking up his rifle. "I wish that Indian hadn't gotten away. All the Apaches between here and the post will be alerted now." "You mean we're cut off?" "What else?" Lane turned to study the terrain carefully. It was time to move. No telling how far away there were other Indians. As Lane turned away, Ed Lowe realized two things. Here was the man he had come to kill, and there was only one horse left, Lane's horse. Hondo heard the sudden sharp growl from Sam. He sidestepped quickly as he turned and saw the flash of Lowe's gun. Hondo fired his rifle from the hip, and the bullet smashed Ed Lowe back to the sand. His muscles convulsed, bringing him almost erect. Hondo Lane did not fire again. Lowe came almost up, then fell, and there was no sound in the brightness of the desert morning. Hondo looked down at what had been Angie's husband, then picked up the tintype. It was a picture of Johnny. He dropped to the sand, his face gray and ghastly, holding the tintype and his rifle and realization. And Sam came close and nudged against him, whining softly. And this time he was allowed to come close. And that was chapter 12 from the book Hondo by Louis L'Amour. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, and reminding you to listen to the John and Ken Show on KFI AM 640, Monday through Friday from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Also, KFI needs to bring back Brian Suits and his show, The Dark Secret Place. Hashtag bring back Brian Suits. Until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.